name is Seamus Barron, and I'm slightly different than Sean. That I came from the neighbouring parish. I came from Braham Parish in Muckta there, born and reared on the Charvel Estate. So I came to Boora in the 23rd of June 1969, and I was going out with Colette at the time because I had met her. I served my time in Tullamore in S.J. Hurst Engineering, and her brother worked there, and through socialising I'd met her, so we were going out anyhow. So I got married in 1970, and straight from the honeymoon that time was a week in Dublin. I was done well to make it, but we came straight from that to the St. Cormac's Park. I'm one of them soldiers that Sean's talking about that lived in the park, and the difference it made, the culture shock I got when I came to the park. Where I lived, we were in a lodge house in the Charles Estate, and we had no neighbours at all of any kind. So I woke up the next morning, I had over 100 neighbours, and I heard this strange noise. I couldn't wonder what was going on. It was the next door neighbour lighting the fire, so it was an unusual thing to happen. But what really shone from me is, all our life we carried water from a council pump, back to the house. There was no water on tap that time, but straight away you walked into this house. It had hot water, it had cold water, it had a bathroom, it had a cooker, and it actually had a grand little shed out the back to put your fuel in. So we were in heaven. This was heaven, and all the houses were built and people came from all over Ireland. Also they came from Scotland, I think, and there was even the German people there. We were a multicultural group before we knew what the word meant even, So we all had the one thing in common, that we were working in Móna, you see. So it was great. Once you got a job in Móna, you were offered a house, which was a massive thing at that time, because there's no way the wages we had, you could actually think of buying one. I know when I left, I had my time served, my wages was £13, 10 shillings. It was the old money that time. And my first check out of Móna then was £17.10, so that was £4 of a rise. That was a massive rise, that was nearly 30% of a rise straight away. And the house, of course, the rent was taken out of your check. You didn't see it, so you hadn't to worry about that. There was no such thing as a mortgage, So we walked away there, I was in the workshop for the first few years anyhow, and sure, the amount of fitters, there was over, I think, 200 fitters in Boora workshop at the time, and there could be maybe, I suppose, up to 40 or 50 apprentices came along. And the training they got was second to none, because the machinery, there was a huge, vast array of machinery, that I had never seen before. The first day I went into the workshop, the first thing that caught me, it was massive. The workshop, they were more like airplane hangars than what I was used to. We were working in the normal garage, but these were massive, because the machinery was special machinery to travel on the bog. They were massive, they had to be, I think they had tracks on them, and the ground pressure had to be down to 2 or 3 pounds per square inch, so they could travel on the bog. But as the workforce grew anyhow, and the craftsmanship there, I'm still at awe the type of people that came there, because there was guys came from that had worked in the army, that had worked on the Air Corps, and we came from different engineering places, so anything you wanted to know, the knowledge was there. Each fitter, to me, he was just like a teacher, and it was a brilliant thing to be able to see a young lad coming in there fresh, and to be able to teach him, and the shared knowledge. Nobody minded sharing the knowledge. When I was serving my time, there was a couple of old guys, and they thought it was they were better off, or to get more money. They didn't tell you what they knew, But this was different. This was a new type of people, And I suppose the houses in Kilcormac, they're built in such a way, they're in circular in shape. So when you looked out your door, you were looking at maybe 70 or 80 other front doors, It always reminded me of maybe the gold rush in America, where all these guys went in their caravans and circled for safety. This was much the same thing to me. But the only difference was, it wasn't gold they were after, it was brown gold. This was the piece. And the wages were very good. The way, like I told you, it was £4 of a rise straight away. But like Sean said there, the overtime was fantastic. If you got to work on a Saturday, you had time and a half up to 12 o'clock, and then double time from 12 on, which was massive. But he did, Sean, I just want to mention, Sean mentioned there that he'd done timekeeping, and on the timesheets, you had 30 minutes grace in the week. You see, you clocked in. You had to clock in each morning or clock out every evening. But you were given 13 minutes in the week. If you went over the 13, you'd lose a quarter of an hour. And Sean could probably relate to this himself. If the boys didn't like you, they scrutinised the old card a good bit to see could they get over the 14 minutes to see would they dock get a quarter of an hour. But if you were on their side, you were sound. But we figured out another way of doing it then, you see. There was a few lads would always be late, you know. And there was a few lads always early. But if you were running a bit late, like the guy that was already in there, he'd just give your card a tip and leave it back on the right hand side. So when you came along, you just bypassed the clock and dropped her in, and you saved your few bob. So there's different ways of getting around things. But the management, when I went there first, a lot of the management were ex-army. Of course, it wasn't long after the war, and time was the thing. Like, you had to be there in time, but you got paid for every second you were there. There was no such thing as not getting paid. But as that went on, like, and the workforce grew, like, you know, all the local guys became management. And that's where it really came into its own. Because now you had guys, first when lads came to work, first they came to the camps, did they? And these were guys that just worked, that were developing the bog. But as they stayed for a while, then they started socialising Kilcormac, and they met a few girls, and a few of them got married. And of course, they had an estate straight away ready to move into, like, you know, which was fantastic. We had socialising. There were 7 pubs in Kilcormac at that time, and the 7th Thursday night was Bogman's night, and the 7 of them was full, because you see there was. I know at the peak of the time, leaving the park where I was, there was over 200 guys leaving it, and today I was just thinking, I was just coming over to you today. There's only 2 men leaves it now to work, and that's a huge change. That had a huge effect on Kilcormac, like, on the amount of money that was coming into it. You know, it's unbelievable. And you see, you got to know, like, the guys got to know one another from work, but then when you came home, you were socialising, and the wives got to know one another, and then the children came. Like, it was it's hard to describe. Like, you know, that time Sean will relate to it, like, and had their own playground built in the middle of it, like, you know, ready for them to play. And there could be 200 or 300 children playing there of a summer's evening. Like, it was so safe, you see, because there was no true road. This was a confined space, all built. And along with that, then with the houses, there was actually 14 acres of greenery. There was 3 big parks. The houses were divided in three groups, like, and there was about 4 or 5 acres in front of each of them where you could play, which. Yeah, on today's building, if you had that kind of ground, there'd be thousands of houses built. Like, you know what I mean? And it's still the same. It was never changed. That park, that grass is still there, and it's maintained by the actual people in the park. It's classed as a private park, like, so there is no grants being given, like, you know, to maintain the park. But it's as good today as it was, as it was 40 or 50 years ago.
Are you still living there?
I'm still living there, yeah. Yeah, I done 44 years with Móna. I'm still living there, yeah. And the very same house, 95 in Kilcormac Park, I had the 2 in family, yeah, and they're both living locally, they both built their house locally. And like Sean says, they could go to college, like, it wasn't their telephone our time, like, you know. I'd say I went to the Tech in Tullamore. There was vocational school, it's a nice word for it now, but that's where we went. You know, and we were glad to get there, like, you know, a lot of people didn't even get that. Like, most of the guys on board the Móna went straight from national school. But to me, it wasn't the letters after your name. These guys could show you how to drive a machine or how to do something. It was field crafts. The field crafts was something to look at, like, you know. But there were some great characters then. There was some guys from Pull, of course, all the villages. Like, there was this character anyhow. I was a mighty character anyhow, but I know Kilroy's had started in Tullamore, like, you know. A lot of people would remember Kilroy, and Dermot Kilroy, I knew him myself, like, Dermot anyhow. He went in anyhow, he was going to buy a cooker, you see. And of course, Pulla, like, every Pulla man was the best man to cut turf or save turf you would meet in the world, let's say. So Dermot says to him, Paddy, if you buy this cooker, he says, do you know, whatever turf you're cutting, like, you know, I says, what 30 you got? And there was no such thing, you never mentioned like weight or like it was the full of Peter Burns. That's how he went on. He had a trailer. Peter Burns used to deliver turf all over the area. And so it's full of Peter Burns. That's how turf went in. Once you were talking to a lad from down that area. I burned 6 to full of Peter Burns, he says. And he says, look, if you buy this cooker, he says, half that'll do you, you know. So the man thought for a while, anyhow. Do you know what I do? He says, Dermy, he says, bring out 2 of them, he says, I won't bother going to the bog at all, he says. Now, they were the type of guys that was witty, like, you know what I mean? But you weren't going to cut them. People thought the bogman was a bit backward. I'm telling you, I worked them and lived with them, like, you know. You won't outsmart. They had more upstairs than the professors at that stage. But the memories, like Sean mentioned, the social side. Of course, Eurovision was a big thing that time, like, you know. But we weren't happy with Eurovision. We said we'd create a BooraVision. And the BooraVision was, you see, Móna was and Boora was all, they were divided up in little areas. Each area was maybe there could be a group of, maybe at that time there could be 30 or 40 guys working. So they had to pick a guy and he had to come forward and represent his area to see would he win this BooraVision. We had a cup and all that. We used to have the adjudicating team. We went to every pub like in the area. That was where we operated anyhow. We had some mighty fun. But there was one particular time, anyhow, one of the lads knew a girl that she was actually one of the Bunratty singers. And he invited her up to this, we were in Dooley's in the Kilcormac, I'll never forget, he invited this girl up anyhow to adjudicate this BooraVision. So this girl, I suppose, was expecting maybe a couple of sopranos and a few, but 4 or 5 lads had sang anyhow. And I can't name anyhow, but we went to a break anyhow, and I could see this girl looking at me with the quiet eyes. I was doing MC at the time, introducing the people anyway. I could see this one looking at me with the quiet eyes. And next thing she sloped over to me and she says, Seamus, I want to ask you something, she says. Can any of these lads sing, she says. But it wasn't about the singing. It was about the way you performed. It was the character, like, you know. It was like, you know, and the camaraderie that was there. And these guys would take it serious enough. They could, you know, they'd be practicing maybe for a couple of months before that, like, you know. But it was all fun. Everything was fun, like, you know. And management, there was no difference between the manager and the guy, like Sean says, or the girl in the office, or the girl in the canteen. Or to me, the best guy, if you want to know something, the lad out in the bog driving the machine, that was the man that knew his job. And if you wanted any bit of information to relate to the bog, that's the man to talk to, you know. But the management recognised that after a while, and they kind of. They went into groups and they gave the workforce a bit more say and power. And sure, the company, it only went from strength to strength and the strength of it. But as the machinery at the start came in from, I think it was Dundalk Engineering, like, you know, and some of it were originally German, because the Germans had built a power station there. But as the workforce grew and they got better, they decided they'd build their own machines, like. And for the last 20 years when I was there, everything was built in-house, including the locals and all the machinery. And it was built to the spec that the guy building it knew what it needed to do. And to modify them and all that, like, you know, sure, before we left, there was nothing bought in. Everything was built in-house, like, you know. So, and even some of the guys then, when the things started to go down, they went away and they started their own big engineering business around the place, like, you know. So I can name 5 or 6 guys living around it. They're head of big engineering companies now, and they count aboard them on. The training that the guys got on board them on, the young lads, they will stand them for the rest of their lives. We were a group that just got together, ordinary workers, like, you know. We could see something in the bog, like, you know. The bog for some people was hardship, like, you know. It was definitely hardship, but we could see something there, like. And I'd have to acknowledge Tom Egan. Tom was the land development manager at the time. And Tom could see this a lot clearer than that, but we all like, you know, had a graw for nature, and, like, you know, you could see what was happening, like, you know. There was a group of 6 or 7 guys got together first, and it was a broad, unencumbered landscape, like. Tom was one of that group, actually. Lord of Mercy, and Tom is no longer with us, but he was an inspiration too. Tom was the accountant, you see. Now, Sean would have worked with Tom, but at the beginning, you see, Móna was strictly core business, like, you know. They wouldn't spend money on maybe sowing a few trees at that time, like, you know. It was just get peat, get money. That was the core value, like, you know. Of course, we needed a few bobs to do a few experiments and maybe make a little lake or a few machines go here or there. But everything had to be put down to a subhead for it to be charged out. Like everything had a subhead, you know. But the rail gang, you see, there was I think there was over in Móna alone. I think there was over 1,000 meters or 1,000 kilometers of rail, like, you know. But that was a huge amount of overhaul and work on that. But I know at the beginning, anyhow, there was a good few little jobs went down to the subhead of rail repairs. And I'd say, if the truth was known, I'd say we'd be down near Ballinasloe, the rail. There's that much money went out of it. But only for the like of guys like that, like, you know, they could see this, like, you know, and they loved it so much, like, you know. And then we came along then, of course, we done the big, we had a conference in Kilcormac, so Sean was there to one of the speakers, and we were behind the like of John Fee and all these guys, like, you know, all them, the experts came and they came with their papers, and that's where it really started, and that's where the parkland started. First of all, Tom Egan, it was very easy to make a lake, you see, because there'd be a lot of water and a lot of springs in the bogs, and the first thing was made was lakes, and then after that came like another parkland, and then in 2002 I think it was, they had this sculpture park. They invited sculptors from all over the world, like, you know, and I was lucky that I was actually sent with them to do the engineering side of it, like, you know. They had the ideas, but I was just, if there was nothing to be welded or something, I was there with them, and I spent weeks with them, like, you know, and it was a job from heaven for me because I loved it, like, you know. But they looked at the bog, like, you know, and they could see different things, like artists see different things. And today now there's a sculpture park out there of international acclaim, like, you know. It's fantastic, like, you know. But it's grand to be said that you were part of that or seeing that coming up, like, you know, along, you know.